Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Paul Martin. I'm the Director of Academic Content here at the National Alliance for Insurance Education and Research. And I'm joined today by a really neat guy named John Barbagallo. John is the Strategic Advisor to Samba Safety. And we're going to have a conversation today about telematics and some results from a new report that Samba Safety has just developed in partnership with the National Alliance. John, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here. Always nice to chat with you.
Thank you. Well, you and I have knocked around the insurance industry, for many, many years. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background and what you do with Samba Safety?
Sure. So my background is almost entirely in the property and casualty insurance industry, and the vast majority of that was spent with Progressive Insurance. So certainly within the United States, one of the leading automotive insurance carriers, in a variety of roles, but with pretty deep experience in product development and IT technology, things of that nature.
Good. Well, you're working now with Samba Safety. Who is Samba Safety and what do they do?
Yeah, so Samba Safety, my association with them is relatively new. I'm excited to be a part of it. It's a company that provides cloud-based risk management solutions to about 15,000 organizations that have automotive risk exposure. Those could be commercial operations, commercial vehicle, trucking operations, what have you, and also insurance carriers. And for insurance carriers, Samba's capabilities basically allowed them to understand, manage, and over time reduce risk, driving risk, and that's both on the policy level and on the portfolio level.
That's great. Well, today we're going to throw a word around a lot. It's called telematics. And help us tell us what telematics is. What does that mean?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, the simplest thing, telematics equals data. But what it is it's connected technology that captures kind of diagnostic, location, and event data directly from a vehicle. It really started, it's decades. It's been around for decades. My earliest exposure was kind of the late 90s. And at that point, the automotive fleet on the road had largely become computerized. You had something called the powertrain control module, which was collecting a lot of information, basically to improve the performance of the vehicle. But with that came a lot of additional data that has over time proven to be very, very useful to the operators of these vehicles in terms of how they manage fleet performance and driver behavior, and now increasingly insurance carriers.
Well, I remember when Progressive, I don't remember if they were the very first, but they were one of the very first ones to come out with the little plug-in thing, that you put in your car that they could actually adjust your premiums based on how many miles you drove and that kind of thing. That was in the 90s, was it not?
Yeah, well, it started in the late 90s. They didn't have a crisp little dongle to plug into the port back then. It was a little more involved, getting out there and connecting to the vehicle and being able to gather and transmit data. It was frankly not a commercially viable operation for an insurance company. But what Progressive saw, and I think a lot of the early adopters saw, was the ability to start to develop a really valuable data asset. Mm-hmm. That there was this new proliferation of data that heretofore was not available to fleet operators, commercial operators, or insurance carriers. And there was just a belief that it would prove to be very useful and very actionable. And the technology's come a long way. So yes,
it has come a long way.
It evolved to a plug-in dongle that any consumer could figure out how to do without a lot of technological savvy. And now, of course, we have apps that can be on a mobile phone and collect a lot of that same data with reasonable accuracy.
Oh, yeah. You think about the ride-sharing companies, how the amount of data they collect is just amazing. I remember the original idea, at least I thought it was, I perceived it at the time, was that you have a little old lady that just goes to the grocery store and to church, And why should she be paying premiums for auto insurance for driving 100 miles a week when others are commuting, 100 miles a day
Sure.
on the road every day? And anyway, it was a fascinating idea, and it's really, really come a long way. I know with trucking particularly. But anyway, you guys we partnered together with Samba Safety some months ago, and we did a study, for lack of a better word. What started that whole thing? Where did the idea come from that, hey, we can partner with somebody like the National Alliance and we can get some valuable information from the insurance?
Sure. I mean, I think from Samba's perspective, they saw the potential in being a provider of telematics data to the industry, and also being kind of a trusted guide on the journey to implementing telematics into insurance operations. But what was missing was kind of a comprehensive view across the industry of how much and where and how was telematics being used. So we were interested in getting a comprehensive view of the marketplace, and kind of where carriers and brokers were in terms of the maturity of any telematics offerings. And then there was also the opportunity to work with your organization, which was exciting, because then you can kind of blend these insights we were gaining from the industry players, and with real true academic research, and hopefully develop a much better understanding.
Well, that from our side, I certainly can tell you, we value that cutting edge kind of information that we can share with those that participate with the National Alliance, so that they can become better producers. For example, that the producer knows what they're talking about when they're talking about telematics. They understand how it plays in the insurance company's underwriting strategy, or heck, even claims resolution strategies. I mean, this information can go lots of places. And we just wanted to stay on the edge enough, and we're tickled to work with you guys so that y'all could collect this information. Well, tell me a little bit about how telematics, how it's doing. I mean, what did you learn from the report? How is it evolving in the insurance industry?
Yeah, I thought the report was very insightful. I wasn't surprised by a lot. A majority of the insurance carriers and brokers that responded, and we had a really good mix of respondents, are certainly aware of telematics and the role and impact it's beginning to have on the industry, and have some level of activity around it. I also wasn't terribly surprised to see that most of the respondents are still very much in the early stages, and on the what I'd call the exploratory stage of the process. So maybe fewer kind of with real actionable game plans around deploying the telematics information.
Well, it would seem to me that if an insurance company were to go whole hog into this from an underwriting standpoint, it's going to be an investment. I mean, there's an education curve. There's how do you incorporate this into our rating systems, that kind of thing? It would be an investment, would it not?
It certainly is, and there's work involved. There's not a plug and play solution to elevate telematics within an insurance organization. And again, that's a role Samba believes they can play, and play well, is helping be a guide. So I think any insurance carrier that's thinking about it, or in the early stages, really needs to think through, what are the use cases that really apply to their approach to the market, their business model, and start to kind of think those through and prioritize, on a few different criteria, like where can it have the most impact, to get a good start, where might it be easiest to implement, what are the downstream implications of doing it? Because now you're dealing with these massively large data sets, bigger than anything they've probably been involved with before. So there's a whole series of questions a carrier kind of needs to work through, and Samba can certainly help them with that. And then figure out where to start, because it's a journey. And you make a really good point there, Paul, that there's a lot of applications to telematics data above and beyond risk underwriting or risk pricing, although that is a high impact area where a lot of people choose to start.
Well, I know that commercial auto insurance for many, many years has been just tough for insurance companies. They haven't been making money writing it. Individually they may, but just in the whole, it's been whether it's the nuclear verdicts or just whatever it is, that it's made it really, really costly. I also was thinking about if you were to try to take telematics data and you were to really incorporate it into your underwriting, that can get really complicated with things like the filings you have to make. I mean, you have to make new filings in all these states. I'm not trying to say that a bunch of these hurdles can't be overcome, but just the rating structure has to change because the commercial lines manual has its rules,
Right.
and that's what everybody uses. But now you have to add in this new element. That's a lot of work.
It is, but if a carrier is operating in multiple jurisdictions, they're already making filings on a
Yep,
regular basis.
they are.
So, I think it's easier now than it was for the early adopters in that, the regulators, the insurance departments are used to seeing filings that include a telematics-based component, a usage-based component. Really, the application of telematics is something I like to refer to as usage-based insurance. So they're used to seeing that. The reality is, you don't have to be a genius to look at performance in the marketplace and see that some of the early adopters really have created competitive advantage around.
Mhm.
And I think that's a compelling reason to really think about bringing it in to your operation, or potentially risk adverse selection down the road and potentially ultimately strategic obsolescence if you don't get in the game on this.
If you don't get into I understand that. And some of these big trucking companies, for example, now it's not just the insurance side, it's also the loss control side of the stuff. Once the drivers all figure out, they know everything I'm doing, they know every place I go, they know how fast I'm driving. It's not just about the insurance piece, it's about the risk management piece.
Well, yes. So you're absolutely right. There's the risk assessment, like
Mhm.
understanding kind of the risk profile of an account, and the relative profile, because it helps you in underwriting tiering and pricing and things of that nature. But there's kind of the ongoing power of the information as it develops to assess how that may be changing, seeing inflection points with a particular account or in the overall portfolio, getting riskier or less risky. But to me, the really exciting thing is the ability to do something about it and kind of react to what you're seeing in the data. And in the commercial space in particular, because all the financial incentives are kind of aligned, the business owner and the
Mhm.
broker and the carrier to reduce risk and drive down loss costs. So you now have a data set that not only helps you make a point in time assessment, but a data set that allows you to understand how that's changing and what you can do to influence positive change in the performance of the fleet or the individual's driver.
And we know that insurance and insurance costs to the consumer, it does drive behavior. Um, I just read an interesting article the other day. It was out of Britain, but it was about how the challenges of insuring electric cars keeps climbing
Mhm.
because of those batteries.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of cool data, but once a Tesla gets in a wreck, they don't park it in the building; they park it outside just in case
Right.
it catches fire. But they're learning so much information, and that's pushing carriers to really question how they insure electric vehicles. But I think the telematics piece, particularly in commercial lines, can make a huge difference if everyone can see the benefits. The producer can see the benefits, the insurance company's benefits, the customer benefits, if you use it in a comprehensive way.
Yeah, I think you're making a really important point. Um, yes, as an insurance carrier, you will begin to build this really powerful and useful data set. But transparency is an important part of that. One, in terms of building a trusting relationship with the
Mhm.
broker and the client, to share the insights and the information that is derived from the telematics data. And also, that's how you begin to improve performance. So
Mm.
it's one thing to understand what's going on in terms of risk, but it's much more powerful to share that and then share what can be done about it. And that's another thing at Samba that another capability we think we can bring to a carrier is we can actually customize training to specific loss events or loss patterns that can be delivered in relatively near time, real time, if you're actively monitoring the data and have access to the data. So I think transparency is an
Well,
important of the program.
transparency is important. And I remember when this whole idea came up in the personal lines area that, I mean, there was resistance. There were people that, before the iPhone, people were going, I don't want them knowing where I'm going and when I'm driving, and that's none of their business kind of thing. That has been one of the challenges, has it not? Is this a distrust of this black box that's, monitoring?
I think it still is a challenge, quite frankly. And, a lot of the early development with based insurance was in the personal auto insurance space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where overcoming consumer objections or establishing consumer trust was an obstacle. But financial incentives work, and
they do.
There was a selection aspect to people who are willing to be monitored, tended to be safer drivers, so that helped, at least in terms of allowing carriers to offer a slightly more competitive rate or a discount. I think we're, consumer trust around the technology is building. People kind of understand we've become a society of connectivity.
Certainly.
Machines connecting to people, machines connecting to other machines, people connecting through digital platforms. So I think society has kind of moved in that direction. In the commercial space, there's certainly there's the same obstacle, but again, I think the financial incentives are so strong and so well aligned between the carrier and the policyholder and the broker to really get, particularly in this market, and you referred to it earlier, Paul. I mean, this is a tough time for commercial auto insurance carriers. The incentives are aligned to get these costs under control, and just kind of the kind of moral, ethical component of let's be safer on the roads. Let's reduce the human trauma of operating these businesses.
That's certainly a wonderful point. And, it's been years since I've trained producers in like commercial insurance. I don't think there's any doubt they need to understand this stuff. They understand what it is, what you can gather, how you can leverage it, so that they can communicate with their customers properly. That's part of what we're doing at National Alliance. We want to educate people. We want to see them get better and succeed in what they're doing. You mentioned that there's lots of different applications for this stuff at an insurance carrier level. Talk a little bit about how this even can come up in claims, how this data can be so helpful in claims.
Oh, it certainly can. You now have an opportunity in the event of a loss to understand not only what happened in the accident itself at a more granular level. You have the velocity of the vehicle and all of that. You actually have a window into the period of time before the accident occurred. So there's a lot. It's just a very rich set of data that allows you to, in some cases, reconstruct what actually took place, and that can get to kind of causation and ultimately affect how you interpret liability around an accident. So yeah, I think there's a huge implication for claims. That's not where, from what I can see, a lot of the energy has been invested at this point, but absolutely.
It's just I just remember having been a claims adjuster, just little pieces of data sometime can make all the difference on how you're going to adjust that loss.
It's very hard to put it together after the fact, right?
It is hard, but if I have more data
into the moment of impact and the moments leading up to the impact, that really helps you draw a crisper picture. And yeah, we shouldn't ignore the possibilities of using cameras. So that's part of telematics.
That's it.
You know,
Yeah, I didn't even mention the video yet. The video element is continuing to grow. There's whole YouTube channels that
yeah,
all they do is show these an 18-wheeler camera. There's a famous lady. I forgot her channel, what her name is, but apparently she drives an 18-wheeler and it's like pink or something. It's really easy to see, and she has 18 cameras on her truck,
yeah.
and she just does videos showing people things that happen out on the road. Um, it's gonna be fascinating, but that's part of it is video, no doubt. How is telematics going to end up interfacing with other types of data beyond the car? Is it?
Yeah,
Does it go beyond the car?
I think it will. You know, I made the point earlier. We're living in an increasingly connected world, and we're living in a time of just mass proliferation of new data. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to kind of marry telematics data to other types of data, other sources of data, I should say, that all go to this issue of risk. Um, where I think there's a lot being done in the area of kind of health, right? So I don't know about you, Paul, but I actually use some of those apps to monitor how many steps I'm taking and how many flights of stairs I climb in a day, and monitoring my heart rhythm. So yeah, and there's obviously HIPAA issues around kind of how that data can be
Right.
used, but I think that's another area where the amount of useful data is just exploding, and certainly can be beneficial to understanding driver performance and potentially changes in risk exposure if you're able to marry that in. So I think there's we don't know where this is going. Like I said, in an increasingly connected world, there's going to be lots of possibilities.
Well, the other day, my wife got a message on her phone, and it was about that our electricity provider here, that we're going to be installing a new type of meter. And I'm sure it's one of these smart meters.
Right.
But I thought when I heard about that, it's kind of the telematics stuff again. In other words, the more data they have, the more they can keep things balanced, if you will, on the grid. Because you remember that famous event we had a few years ago with where the ice storm and we were all freezing to death,
Down there in Texas.
Well, yeah.
I was warm.
I was not. It was, and it turns out there was it was a real interesting little phenomenon. We had plenty of electricity here, but they lost all the electricity in West Texas, and it was because all the gas wells froze up. And because of that, we had to share our electricity with Midland. We had plenty of electricity. It's theirs that went out. So we had to keep sharing. And that was the problem we had. Somebody asked a question. It says, can the knowledge of telematics help a commercial trucking producer grow their book of business? What do you think about that? How would you answer that one, John?
I would absolutely say yes to that. Again, the broker would have to have the producer would have to have a good understanding of the value that could be brought to the client by not only being monitored, but by taking action on the insights that can be gleaned from that data. So to me, that would be a major selling point, and it could be a differentiator for a producer to really engage the client on that topic and help them understand how to apply those insights to their business. And again, that's where, frankly, Samba can help a lot. I kind of give them the game plan and the fundamental understanding of telematics to go and engage the client on that level. So, yeah, if I were in that role and I was looking to grow my book of business, I would absolutely have that be part of my call.
In your quiver, right? Some things that you can offer to the client. In the olden days, like back in the 90s, I knew an agent that he actually helped a very large customer with a very large fleet helped them organize a truck rodeo. I don't know if you ever heard of a truck rodeo.
No.
It was all these. Imagine the drivers for the company. If you were accident free for the year, you could get into the rodeo,
Okay.
and then they would have these contests. Moving your truck through cones or backing contests and all this kind of stuff. Well, today that thing would be obsolete because you can have all these cameras on your truck, and heck, my truck will back itself, if I needed to. So, but I know a producer that's equipped with interesting methods for improving safety. That's another value to the customer. Being that,
yeah, you brought up an interesting point there about providing incentives to be safe, right? And in that example, it's, hey, if you're accident free, you get to participate in something that
yeah,
presumably is fun. But that's kind of after the fact. You're sorting out the ones that had accidents from the ones that didn't. Wouldn't it be fun if you could provide incentives or rewards based on just improving behavior before the accident happens?
Before they ever have an accident. That's right.
I think that to me gets to be very exciting.
The safer drivers get bonuses or things like that. Somebody asked another question. It says, what advice do you have for commercial carriers still in the early stage of adopting telematics? What would you tell them? You're the C-suite guys.
Well, without being overly self-serving here, I would say engage somebody with experience, kind of going on this journey, because it is a journey, and don't feel that this is an initiative that it's kind of all or nothing. Because as you pointed out earlier in our discussion, Paul, I mean, there's work to be done here. So it's kind of breaking down the journey into parts and figuring out where to start, how to prioritize that, then kind of working through all your internal processes, the things you do today, where you believe your organization creates value. And then you have to fit telematics into that. So it's, I wouldn't say everything is kind of a custom application, but you do not want telematics to necessarily completely or entirely disrupt how you do business. That's
certainly
very costly. It's not necessary to do that. But I would say, yes, engage someone with experience and expertise. Be thoughtful about where you start. Understand it's a journey, and just kind of bite it off one piece at a time.
Yep. You're going to have these companies. Most of them will have to partner with someone from the outside. I mean, yes, they're used to crunching big numbers, and actuary's been around forever with big data sets, but this is a whole new game, and they need to be talking to people that really understand how this stuff works, and not have to make such a giant investment.
Yeah. Now you raised another good point, Paul, and that is just the size of the data set. So insurance companies are really good with data, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the business, right? And they have actuaries and they have statisticians and they have people that are really good at that. But just the size of the data set with kind of new bits of information literally being generated every second when you're when you're monitoring the performance of a vehicle and a driver, it's just it's a different scale, so it requires different infrastructure, and it requires companies to up their game in terms of data science and those attributes.
It does. Somebody commented that says that they're a professor for insurance and risk management. They say that they still see a high percentage of young people reluctant to use telematics. On an individual level, that even our youth still today have some reluctance to.
Yeah. Again, I'm not sure the professor's point of reference, but I'm guessing it's probably personal insurance customers.
No doubt.
So, yeah, I think there is skepticism or maybe a belief that they know how they drive and feel it will not be treated favorably if they're monitored. As a high mileage driver myself, I always worried about that. But as it turns out, while mileage does correlate with exposure, it's actually driving behaviors that are much more predictive than total miles. That's why I think that, where we're really going to see a change in adoption in use of telematics telematics is in the commercial space. And I'll just keep going back to the economic drivers are there. Everybody wins if they adopt telematics.
Yeah, I love your point about being young people, because there's a reason why your rates go down at 25. there's a good reason why that happens. Well, who else is doing this kind of stuff? I know, like are the phone providers doing this kind of things? Are they collecting, like the AT&Ts or the Verizons or those kind of?
Yeah. So it's a fairly fragmented market still in terms of what we'll call telematics service providers, TSPs. So a number of different types of entities have gotten into it, including some of the phone carriers. It's consolidated somewhat, but that is actually one of the challenges of building out a telematics program, is you need to ingest data from multiple sources, and the data are not consistent, and they need to be normalized. So again, that's a service that Samba provides. They build the integrations with the TSPs.
Okay.
They ingest the data, they normalize the data, and they can give you kind of a one place to go to get the information from multiple providers in a usable, actionable format.
Well, I noticed even like grocery stores, they collect an enormous amount of data. I've actually sat on a plane one day with a guy who's like a regional director for our big chain down here. And I just peppered him with questions and asking stuff. And he told me, Paul, he said, we know exactly how you move through the store. He said, not you, we're not spying on you. But he said, we know how you come in, what aisles you go down, and what path you take. And he said, that stuff on the end caps, that's for you, because we know that you go around that corner. Anyway, he was telling me about all this data they collected. And I was just amazed at how much they know about our behavior in the store. And I guess there's really no end to this stuff. It's going to keep going like this. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on here and doing this with me. This has been a really interesting conversation. It's fun. And again, I encourage those that are watching, insurance producers or carriers or underwriters, that consider this and consider how it's going to end up being a key component in what we do in our job as agents and risk managers and underwriters. But again, John, thank you again. And thanks everybody for coming on the call. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thank you.